Hey everybody. So there's been a thing that's been requested regularly on this channel that is a thing I've been very hesitant to do, if I'm perfectly honest. The online left has a problem with spirituality. Many of the people in it are atheists, and they're not just atheists, they're aggressively atheist. That is that they do not believe anything, and they really think that the belief of this stuff is cringe. Where their views fall short, in my opinion, because I do share some of them, is when it comes to certain Eastern philosophies, arguably religions. I am an ordained Zen priest in a Zen order known as Hollow Bones. My teacher, Junpo Dennis Kelly, was a guy who, and I talk about this more in the video with him, who was an amazing human being. He also had issues. His teacher definitely had issues. One of the things that happens with Zen is sometimes this teaching from one step down from teacher to student, or transmission as we call it, gets better with time. And so the thing that I want to sort of share with you guys is my perspectives from my order. Now, I'm not saying this is Zen Buddhism. I'm not saying this is, by its nature, every interpretation of Zen. This is a very specific version. That is, my teacher's school was Rinzai Zen, which is the smaller of the two schools in Japan. There's Soto and Rinzai. And the way I always understand them is the peasantry went to Soto, and it tended to focus on shikantaza, just sitting, or open monitoring meditation. And Rinzai, which was the samurai caste, that's where they went. They were much smaller, and they tended to use koans, or specialty-made riddles, to focus on in meditation in order to break through the ego. Consider one a form of erosion of self or ego, and the other one sort of tack nuking. Both take about 20 years, as my teacher would joke. Because my teacher was American, he did not like the way Zen was taught. He felt that the way it was taught was incredibly patriarchal, problematic. You know, he was a hippie, right? So his whole thing was that there was these issues built into this that needed to be discussed. And part of it is that his view was that we can do this better, and we can do this in a way that will make it more accessible. Right? So that was kind of his thought is we can do this differently. What he wanted is, instead of sitting in rows, which is traditional for Zen, he would have us sit in circles. He would have us, not practice meditation quite as long, instead breaking it up into very large stints. Sessions, or 7-day practicing retreats, where you would be in silence, would be always followed with a party and things like that to liven the stuff up, make it modern. But one of the things that we did was our services, which were always a morning service, and then there was usually like an evening thing we did together or whatnot. All of these things were done in English. And the reason he felt very passionate about that was that his idea is that you should know what the fuck you're saying. And you should know what it means, because his belief was philosophical reorientation is important. If you're going to wake up, as he would say, the idea is you should know where you're aiming for, because a lot of people practice Zen or other types of Buddhism in a way where they are reading these things in Korean or Japanese, and they do not know what they're saying. If they are not someone who's studied those languages, they are basically just sort of just regurgitating those ideas without actually knowing what they're saying and agreeing to them at a very clear, heartfelt level. So I want to start off with just today talking about this, and I'll probably do more videos on this as we go, but I want to kind of lay out some terminology real quick. None of this requires you to believe anything that I believe, and all of these beliefs to me are tried and true tested. They are things that I've experienced. I don't tend to go with things that are based on faith. I am not a faith-based person. So the things that I talk about here are things that I have experienced in my own way, or things that I have experienced that I have attributed to this stuff. You can believe that I'm insane. You can believe that I just had various altered state experiences. You can believe whatever you want. It doesn't change my view. When I say wake up, what I mean is become aware of your own internal nature. That is, Zen's perspective, at least our order's perspective, is that the nature of the self is empty. That is, if you sit deep enough in practice, eventually everything melts away and there's just emptiness, just pure consciousness. Now, for some people, that might sound actually really peaceful. To others, it might sound like hell. And the reason is there's various ways that could infer to what degree you're able to kind of understand that part of yourself. But if you cut away the parts of you that have a story, get rid of the narratives, get rid of the memories, cut out the preferences and all the other things that make you you, what remains? When I say mind, what I'm referring to is the actual metaphysical or experiential or ontological experience of mind. That is, I've seen people in our Discord get confused and think I'm talking about the mind as though the brain. No, the brain's the physical correlate. This is, again, where I get really irritated with people who haven't really watched the integral videos, because in the quadrants discussion, we talked about this. The mind is not reducible to the brain. The brain is not reducible to mind. They are two different phenomena that are correlates of one another. If you say everything is of the mind, you are reducing the entirety of whole of human experience. And if you say the mind is more important than the brain, you ignore the physical objective correlates of reality. You have to have both. So when I say mind, what I'm referring to is the subjective experience of mind. From a certain perspective, if you go deep enough in practice, you eventually recognize that all of this is mind. Not in some solipsistic way in which you are making all of this up, but that everything is being interpreted through the same filter. To borrow something from a dear friend, Fesh, who watches a lot of Star Trek, it's very much like you're living in your own holodeck. It just seems to, weirdly enough, cross over to other people's. There appears to be some kind of objective reality here that we're agreeing upon, but there still seems to be ways that we are biased and our subjective perspective can be limited. That's the entire part of the integral discussion about development, is that each stage of development is true but partial. It has its own truth to it, but it's partial, or it's not objective. It's not the way reality looks, it's how we perceive it and what levels we take into ourselves. Rather than talk about the tradition of Zen, because I feel like that's boring as shit, to me, Zen is about maintaining a regular mindfulness or meditation practice. Meditation in English is a dumb fucking word because it often gets misunderstood. Sometimes meditation refers to introspection. Sometimes it refers to a spiritual practice like contemplative prayer. In reality, when I say meditation, what I'm talking about is dharana concentration practice. That is, focused attention meditation, as it is said in psychology. You focus on a particular thing, an idea, a word, or a koan, and what you're doing is using that as a means by which to experience the wholeness of mind by moving you out of the way. Now, if you want to go see the States video on integral, that'll give you a much more thorough version of that. And so I want to read this from one of the older variations of our Mondo manual. So in Hollow Bone Zen and Mondo Zen, one of the things my teacher did was grab a lot of people who were in psychology, who were in neurology, people, and you wanted to understand, okay, yeah, there's all this great Zen belief stuff, but how does it work? And so his idea is that you change the way you think, which is true, cognitive behavioral therapy shows this, and you change how you engage with the world. But to do that, you have to have the right understanding so you can experience your own true nature in the right way. So I'm going to read what he says here verbatim, and you can do with this as you see fit. And then after that, what I will do is I will then give you a practice that you can do that if you want to try this out, and again, no one's saying you have to be a Zen Buddhist, no one says you have to do anything. I know you all are allergic as fuck to some of this stuff. What I want to do is offer you something that in case you want to try this, this is something you can do. Cleaning up our language, philosophical reorientation. Within this new view, the term ego is used to identify all activities of superficial self-referencing mind, all thoughts, feelings, emotions, and memories, both positive and negative. The ego is considered to be a wholly conditioned process or function, a personified structure that arose in infancy, formed in an empty, unobstructed mind. It is not viewed as a permanent separate self. We have been taught and have chosen to believe that our ego is permanent, but in truth, our thoughts, feelings, memories, and emotions are temporary. Just like our bodies, in this Zen practice, we relate to our thoughts and emotions as just another sense, the same as smell, touch, taste, sight, and sound. Our emotions have the same function as our other senses. They bring us information. Normally, one's ego has a fixed set of reactions to whatever circumstances are arising. Within this Zen practice, we develop the ability to experience the emotions and understand the information they are bringing from a much deeper and wider view. From here, we can begin to respond more consciously and compassionately to life circumstances. Still with me? Good. From the ego's view, you sit there, I sit here. We seem to be two separate beings. This temporary experience of a separate self naturally and continuously arises. The error in logic causing this is simple. I think, therefore I am, as in Descartes. But is it possible that I think, therefore I am is not deep enough? Is it possible that that is an upside-down view? Is it not more accurate to say, I am, therefore there is thinking? Since we remain conscious even when no thoughts arise. At a deeper level, we intuitively know this, and we subsequently long to understand our deeper nature. Evolution has its own mysterious timetable. Now is the time to evolve, our time. We like to be flowery. The problem with ego, this self-maintaining illusion, is that it is formed within us before our brains were developed enough to consciously recognize our deeper nature. One way to experience this truth is by going through ego time regression. Type of therapy you can do, actually. Going back through time, recalling your adolescent state, then your young child state, then your infantile state of unconditioned mind, where you experienced only instinctual reactions like hunger and discomfort. Here you had no words, no names, no signifiers of anything, not even mama or dada. You are unable to walk or control your bowels. You are in a state of mind with no distinction between inside and out, no self or other. You are just naked consciousness, empty of ego. I talked about this before on the channel where babies, when they're born, developmentally appear to not be able to understand subject-object referencing, because what they'll do is when they chew on things, it's not just for the search of food, it also appears to be a way to differentiate. If I bite on my foot, well, that must be me. Because if I bite on this block, I don't feel it. Not me. Me, not me. Me, not me. Do you see how that starts to construct something? Reversing this process as you grew out of infancy, at some point through your brain development and your physical senses, you became of the world out there, creating a self in here. A temporary construct, you, grew as a brain structure within the fundamental, empty witnessing awareness, creating the self-illusion. You were conditioned by your genes, animal nature, culture, parents, and whoever reared you, either mimicking or rejecting their patterns. Over time, your preferences, reactions became habitual, memorized, ingrained as neurological brain structures. True. You still with me? Good. You now live through your beliefs and stories that you project onto the world. Your ego constantly references and reacts to these habitual patterns that we call the hysterical historical, which they're referring to there as the way in which we act, which is always calling forth the past. We've talked about this with Gestalt therapy. We've talked about this with very other notions. But essentially, there's a way that we're always reacting to the present as though it was the past, because the heuristics we use, whether you want to call those figures from Gestalt, or you want to talk about that as, traumas or whatnot, we're always pulling those forward. It's why when you react a certain way to certain things, it always has the same feel to it, because we tend to reuse these things. From the Dhammapada, early teachings of the Buddha for laypeople. We are what we think. All that we are arises within our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Junpo continues, conceptually, it is important to recognize that the ego changes over time. It disappears in deep sleep. It loses the ability to access memory in old age. It can become demented or neurotic, and it dies when the body dies. It is only because of deeper meditative mind, pure awareness, that ego mind has a place to arise and continue to arise. Ego mind is at the surface of the deeper, empty mind. Without a deep, pure, empty mind, ego cannot exist. So the way I tend to think about this is like a container. You can exist as consciousness without a thought or without a feeling. So it says then that you are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings. And we've talked about this on the channel. You're not your thoughts, you're not your feelings, you're not your senses. Those are just information coming to you. There seems to be awareness or mind that exist outside of that. Or better yet, they're happening inside of. It's almost like the thoughts and feelings arise moment to moment. And we almost, due to our misperception of our self as being permanent, identify with those feelings. We even do this in our English language, right? I'm angry. No, you're not. You feel angry. You're experiencing anger. You're not anything. Another way to say this is, what is a self? A self appears to be a combination of nature and nurture factors leading to a sort of construction of various preferences, memories, experiences, and the like that all seem to come together to form what appears to be a constant. But what I would argue is, and if you go deep enough in meditation, you recognize this, that that's actually not a constant. It's actually flickering in and out of awareness. Now, let me be clear. I think it's important we read this point because I want you to make sure you understand this, because this is one of the major misunderstandings of Zen. There's this belief that you're supposed to kill the ego. You're supposed to get rid of the damn thing. You can try that. A ton of LSD will do it. The thing comes back. You can do this through lots of means, but it always comes back because there always has to be some level of self-referencing to exist. Self-referencing is useful. Self-referencing can be a way to make sure you can drive a car, or have a name, or exist in society, or have a conversation. What we're talking about is experiencing the depth of that emptiness, because once you understand this, it changes the way you react and experience your emotions. You're no longer overwhelmed by them. They're just happening inside of you. They're just information coming up, no matter how intense. And it also means that you no longer react the way you did before, because you can learn over time to not have the same historical reactions you did before. So Junpo goes on and says, it is important to remember that your temporary ego, this sense of me that you have constructed, does not need to be annihilated and is not bad. You must develop a strong and healthy ego to function in the world. Liberation comes when we see through the delusion of the ego as permanent, separate self. In Mondo Zen practice, we deconstruct the ego, reform it, and reconstruct a new ego that includes the realization of its essential empty nature and confused, immature emotional nature. Because our ego is wholly Because our ego is a wholly conditioned process and not a fixed entity, it can and must be reconditioned to become liberated. When we experience genuine insight and experience who we truly are, we can answer the knock at our door. Knock, knock. Who's there? Nobody. So he ends this with a Rumi poem, which I'll read. Rumi was a Middle Eastern poet, very brilliant. I have lived on the lips of insanity, wanting to know reason, knocking on a door. It opens. I have been knocking from the inside. So, this doesn't mean you have to get rid of yourself. That doesn't mean anything like that. What it's referring to is you have to change your relationship to it. When we talk about politics, we often talk about propaganda and the way that sometimes groups like the alt-right and various other folks use this as a means to control, right? We know this because you can see Alt-right furries, you can see various other groups like incels will use cult-like tactics to change the way people think to bring them in. My teacher had a saying that I thought was really useful. They're all cults, just choose the right one. And so the idea is that rather than being afraid that you're being indoctrinated, indoctrinate yourself. Take control of that processes. If you have to have a window, if you have to have a way, a function of thinking, a function of existing, pick a good one. Why sit there and wait for someone else to give you something when you can freely choose one instead of just sort of happening into it, right? So, understanding Buddhism is important, and we'll talk about this more with history, and I'll go over these then again, but there's the three truths we need to understand from this perspective. And these are ones that I hold very close to my heart. Impermanence. When we truly realize and understand the embody impermanence, we no longer grasp and cling to that which is inevitably going to go away, no matter how much we cling. The realization brings gratitude as we now fully experience, appreciate, and radically accept the ephemeral nature of this life, this moment, this fleeting gift. Suffering. When we truly realize that the pain we experience in sickness, old age, and death is unavoidable and a natural part of living, we discover the delightful truth that while physical and psychological pain is inevitable, suffering is always optional. We no longer try to flee when pain inevitably arises. We work with it. We come to radical self-acceptance. So this argument would be is that suffering actually comes from when we argue with reality or we avoid pain. When we naturally react and avoid pain is where we create more suffering later. This is what we talk about with me and Zena about the idea of avoiding conflict. When you avoid conflict, it leads to more problems in a relationship later. You're creating suffering instead of just fucking dealing with the pain. And lastly, selflessness. When we truly realize selflessness, we experience the pure empty nature of our deepest consciousness. We experience our ego's thinking and feeling as just temporary sensing at the mind's surface and not a permanent fixed self. At last, we experience genuineness and know who we really are, the Buddha. See, in Buddhism, Buddha didn't want people to worship him. The statues are there as a guide. And the idea here is that from a certain perspective, the realization is all Buddha means is the awakened one. So from a Zen Mahayana perspective, you're all Buddha. You just don't know it. So what the fuck is my point with all this? This is the first of a couple of videos where I want to explore my background at this and kind of explore why this is still meaningful to me. Partially because I want you guys to have tools, but partially because I also want to know if this still fits in my life. This was a big part of it for like 10 years. I miss it. I miss it a lot. But I also know that I am not the same person anymore. And I need to figure out how that fits for me. And so I find that I'm much more motivated when I care about things about the channel, so I'm going to make it your problem. So I'll end this video on this point. If you want to start engaging with these videos in good faith and try out this stuff, what I would recommend is you take up a regular sitting practice. I would start with 5 minutes a day. Find a nice place to sit where you can sit back straight up. If you deal with a disability, find a way that you can sit comfortably. And what I would recommend is just find a place to sit. You can be in a chair, you can be cross-legged, you can be on a cushion, but find a way to sit. And what I would like you to do is just keep your eyes open and let your eyes fall about 6 to 8 feet in front of you. Let your eyes go soft. You're not trying to bore a hole in the floor. And then just let your breathing become natural and slow. And on the in-breath, I want you to listen as deep as you can. Listen deeper than your thoughts and feelings. Deeper than your judgments, deeper than your preferences. Listen. You could use any sense for this, but use listening because it's the easiest one. And on the out-breath, say to yourself the word listen. Follow that instruction. If your mind gets off track and you start thinking about your checkbook or some girl's cute butt or whatever, just notice that you've gone off track and come back to the practice. Listening deeper than your thoughts and feelings, listen. Listening deeper than your thoughts and feelings, listen. again and again. Do this for 5 minutes, and then next week 10. And if that becomes sustainable, move up to 15. The only way that you can really test this stuff for yourself is to try it and actually do so in good faith. If this is not your interest and this is not something you want to do, you don't have to. I know how the left hates all things faith-wise and religion-wise and genuinely any kind of spiritual philosophy-wise. I am saying, put yourself to a test. See how this fits for you. And as we go through this in future videos, just see what fits. No one's trying to convert you. All I'm trying to offer you is a map that was really helpful for me. You want to know how I come to my takes? Do you want to know how I think about myself and the ways that I try to alleviate my own suffering? This is how I did it. Therapy helped, lots of other things helped, but this was a big part of it. So, with that said, I'll try to create a written version of this for the Discord, and I hope this has been helpful to give you kind of an insight, at least philosophically, into what we're going to be talking about when it comes to my Zen tradition. I want to remind you that this is not the same as all our Zen traditions, and there are different interpretations, different schools. This is only one of them. So I don't want you to say that this is the only Zen perspective. I just want you to realize this is the one that I'm coming from. Okay? So with that said, I hope everyone enjoyed this video and was willing to make it all the way through. And if you are, do all the stuff, and lots of love, and we'll see you in the next one. Okay? Bye. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, consider donating to us. You can support us on our website, transgrowtherapist.org. You can also help us on our Patreon, link below, or you can become a member here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.